The Intercept reports that Google is planning to launch a censored version of its search engine in China. This is actually Google's first attempt to penetrate the Chinese market since 2010. In exchange for the opportunity, the company's agreed to ban particular sites or search times on topics like human rights, democracy, and free speech. Gallagher is an investigative journalist for The Intercept who broke this story on Google. He joins me now via Skype from Brighton, England. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us. Can you explain for a bit as to exactly what will be censored and how they go about getting this deal?
Well, the plan is Google is developing a kind of customized Android app for the Chinese market, and what it will do is basically automatically censor things that are currently censored in China. The Chinese government, as people probably know, has a quite comprehensive internet censorship system set up, and it's known as the Great Firewall. It blocks all kinds of information about, political opponents of the ruling Communist Party regime there, even things about academic studies, about human rights, about dissidents, about historical events like the Tiananmen Square massacre, all kinds of things that they're blocking out. And so for Google to go into China and relaunch its search engine in China, it would need to censor this kind of information from its search engine.
Why do you think they decided to enter this partnership and allowed to be censored?
Well, it's a very good question, because Google did previously, between 2006 and 2010, they did actually operate a censored version of the search engine, but then they left. Citing concerns about free speech, about totalitarian oppression in China. And now they're sort of reversing on that and going back in. So the question is obviously, why would you? One of the reasons I believe is that Google is now under new leadership. There's a new CEO, Sundar Pichai is the new CEO of Google. The co-founders of Google, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, they have both now sort of taken a more hands-off approach. So the leadership's changed, the ideas have changed within the leadership of Google, and I think that they just want to, give it another try. They believe that giving people a kind of partial, even if it's a censored sort of set of information from Google is better than none, I think. But also there's a financial aspect which should be is definitely up there as a consideration. It's a massive. There's like 750 million internet users in China. Massive market for Google. Huge revenue there that can be exploited. So it's kind of a lucrative prospect for them. So I think there are many different considerations, but there's a lot of politics involved also.
You make the financial point, which is significant, but Google's slogan is also "Don't be evil." How could agreeing to these restrictions conflict with those values?
Well, yeah, this is what a lot of people have been pointing out today online once we published the story, is that there's a kind of big contradiction, it seems like, between this kind of principled stance of not doing evil, of doing the right thing, trying to be a company that is, acting in a kind of moral and ethical way, with actually becoming complicit in really quite draconian, terrible censorship of information. And this is why the story has got such traction. It's why it's a very controversial story, because people do find it kind of, problematic that Google is doing this when it's supposed to be a company that has these values. And I think that, what I hope is that the Google leaders come out and actually explain how their values are in keeping with what they're proposing to do in China, because for me, I think that it's in a total contradiction with their claimed values.
You talk about contradiction too. Their stance is really different from other major American tech companies. Can you explain sort of how other tech firms are dealing with China?
Yeah, well, Facebook actually is kind of pushing in a similar direction as Google. The thing is, because the Chinese economy is just booming so much that there's just so much money there for these companies, and it's just like they want to be in there and they want to be tapping into that. Facebook has been doing that. Facebook has been reportedly developing tools to actually help to, like what Google's doing, what I've reported Google's doing, kind of to help Chinese censors censor the Chinese version of Facebook. But there are other companies, as you rightly point out, that aren't doing that. I think Twitter is one example. They've kind of not shown signs that they're going to be doing a censored version of Twitter for the Chinese market. And in fact, Twitter's blocked in China. If you were in China now and you tried to access Twitter on the internet there, you wouldn't be able to do that without using some kind of circumvention technology or whatever. So it's actually blocked. But but Google is definitely, what it's doing isn't, I wouldn't say it's a normal thing for a company of this standing to be doing. It's certainly extremely controversial, and there's going to be a lot of questions from all kinds of different groups, human rights groups, politicians, senators, demanding to know what it is that, what is Google hopes to get out of this and why it is deciding to try and, get back involved in doing a censored version of Google.
But ultimately, is the bottom line, Ryan, that there's just too much money to be made in China to not make some sort of a deal that might compromise values?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that it's all about money. I think a big part of it is going to be about money. But what I've heard and read from Google's management and the statements that they've made, they do actually have this kind of belief that they want Google to be accessible to everyone. The question, though, is, does it really count if you're providing someone with a kind of semi-version of Google? If you're actually, it's like it's a blocked version, it's a censored version, it's a restricted version. Does that really count? Are you not just contributing to the problem of the censorship then? And this is what Google is going to have to explain, because clearly, to launch the search engine, it has to be completely complicit in a really extreme, problematic censorship that's totally counter to democratic values that certainly most Americans would hold.
I want to read you a tweet that just came out a short time ago from Senator Marco Rubio, and he tweets, "Giving benefit of the doubt until we learn more, but reading how Google has plans to help China set up a censored search engine is very disturbing. They won't help Department of Defense keep us safe, but they will help China suppress the truth." What do you make of that comment?
Well, I mean, I think he's making what appears to me to be a valid point, maybe a valid criticism. The US government and other governments around the world are often trying to get Google to help them more in terms of, for example, surveillance or national security issues. And Google, is quite resistant in certain areas on that. They have been historically, at least that's what the governments, Western governments, have complained about. But then if they're going to go into China and start, being complicit in really quite an extreme version of censorship and also surveillance in terms of, if you go into the Chinese market, you have to agree to provide the Chinese government with data on the users of the service. So if the Chinese government comes knocking on Google's door in China and says, we want this information, they're forced to provide it. So the point that I think Marco Rubio is trying to make is that how can Google go into China and be complicit in this kind of surveillance and censorship and then not help Western governments? There's a kind of contradiction there that's quite striking. And again, this is one that Google needs to explain. This is an area that they're going to have to come out and talk about. But as I've found myself, trying to get answers out of them on this is not easy at all. In fact, they've completely blanked all of my attempts to contact them and question them about it. So.
All right, we'll have to see exactly where this goes. Ryan Gallagher, thank you very much for coming on and for your reporting.
Thanks for having me.